Good morning. So, after all these cool presentations, I'm going to be your Debbie Downer of the morning. So, we're here to talk about cybersecurity and privacy. So, after you put in all these cool IT toys, actually, before you put them in, this is what we need to be thinking about first. But real quickly, just about the city of Decatur. We are about 20,000 people, and we're in just over 4 square miles. From an IT standpoint, we have some really good density for some of these projects. Our employee base, 225 employees in our organization, and of those employees, we have 0 people dedicated to IT. Number of us wear various hats, and Russ Madison, our finance director in the back of the room, he and I sometimes put our heads together and become part of an IT director. But we contract with a company called VC3 for all of our IT services. And Josh, if you'll just raise your hand, Josh is our VCIO, our virtual CIO. Even though he is here in person, he's not an avatar. He's a virtual CIO for the city of Decatur, works for VC3. So everything is outsourced, and we are in a hosted cloud environment. And so all of our, or at least most of our servers and data resides off-site in the VC3's data center. And we do manage our entire IT program. So while we may not have IT staff on the payroll, we do have a technology committee that represents all the departments. But I'm here to talk about cybersecurity and privacy. And I do believe that this is one of the most important issues that's not being addressed by local governments in the state and across the country. I think we're very vulnerable in this area, and we really need to be addressing this. Why do you care? Obviously, I don't know that we needed to have the Atlanta cyber attack, but if there's anything good that came out of that, is that it's raising the awareness about how we are vulnerable, and what happened in Atlanta can happen to any city. These threats and techniques are becoming very sophisticated. That may be beyond the ability of your city or county's beyond the ability of your IT staff. Government agencies clearly are being targeted, but it's not just the big cities. Actually, the smaller cities, the hackers know that the smaller communities don't have the staff, don't have the resources quite often to put towards the cybersecurity that's necessary. So we are very vulnerable in that area. And also just the risk. I mean, think about the data that you have in your organization and what can be done with that data if someone is able to hack into it. They can keep you from having access to the data, demand ransom for the data. They could release very sensitive personal information about your employees. They can just bring your systems to a halt. Where you're not able to accept payments, say at the front window. Also, one thing that's kind of scary in this world, we think about they're attacking our computer systems. That would be tragic, and it can be a real hassle. But the physical destruction that can also occur. There have been attacks on electric grids. There could be attacks on train systems. Think about the MARTA system. If someone's able to hack into those systems, water systems, and just even imagine the chaos that could occur in your community if the traffic signal system is hacked. And then also the ability of hackers to compromise our communication systems, that if someone's able to gain access to your city's Facebook account or your website and send out bogus messages to the community, that could also be quite alarming to your community. Maybe communicating a threat, that actually is, it's not real, but it looks like it's coming from your city. We're talking about the smart cities. The smart cities projects really, in many ways, can create more concerns around cybersecurity. And so in the city, before just jumping right into the smart cities projects, we said, let's stop, let's back up, let's look at our cybersecurity situation, cybersecurity and privacy, before we start adding a bunch of new smart city projects or adding sensors that are collecting data. Let's make sure that we have this foundation in place. And so we started, this was last year, we conducted a cybersecurity risk assessment. And I've heard a lot of people say, just where do we get started in terms of, addressing the cybersecurity concerns? And my advice is that you start with an assessment of your IT environment. We worked with the Georgia Tech Research Institute. Many of y'all are familiar with them, GTRI. This was the first risk assessment that they had performed with a local government. And I have to say, if anyone out here is interested, I'll be glad to talk to you offline, but I highly recommend working with someone like GTRI, because you will have vendors come to you and say, we'll perform an assessment, but then at the same time, they're trying to sell you a service. They'll try to sell you, their antivirus software. And I strongly recommend that you keep those things separate, that you have someone that they're not trying to sell you their service. They're coming in, they're not serving themselves. They need to be coming in and serving you. GTRI, they used a combination of techniques to perform this assessment. We followed this defense in depth model, as well as they use part of the framework. You may have heard the term NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, Cybersecurity Framework. And I encourage anyone who's got a whole lot of time on their hands or has trouble sleeping to just open up the NIST framework and pour through it. I found it to be rather complex and complicated, but having someone like GTRI, pull out the important pieces of that and include it in our process was very important. But quite simply, the risk assessment, identifying the risk, assessing the risk in our environment, and determining how we could best respond to it. And you look over here, and this is the defense in depth model. And we started, I'm going to go through each of these, started with our policies and procedures, and then worked all the way into the middle of the bullseye with our data. And I'm not going to go into a whole lot of depth here. But starting with the policies, procedures, and awareness, this is the area where folks like you and me need to be spending our time. So these are making sure that you have the policies in place. Just as simple as IT user policies, that your employees know what those policies are, they're trained in those, they're signing off on those policies. Also, do you have a portable media policy? What's your policy about picking up a thumb drive and sticking it into a computer on your network? That could wreak havoc on your network. Also, having a password protocol that they're changed on a regular basis. Also, training everyone in your organization needs to be, everyone that has access to your computer system needs to be receiving a cybersecurity training. We work with the SANS Institute, and they have a training curriculum called Protecting the Human, and that's what we've been for the last 2 years. We've been providing that training. It's real simple. It's videos. videos that your employees review. They could do it at their own desk or at home. But we do make sure that everyone goes through that training. And then this incident response plan, everyone needs to have a plan for when the attack happens. It's not if it's going to happen in your environment, it's going to happen, and you need to be ready. I put a star by this because that was one of the strongest recommendations that came out of the assessment for us. Now, these other areas might be good questions for your IT folks. Like I said, you saw the bullseye. We moved from kind of the policy procedure area and then move into the perimeter of your network. So the first line of defense, do you have intrusion detection service? Do you have intrusion prevention service? So not only are you trying to prevent people from coming into your network, but if people are trying to intrude, that you're going to be notified, or your IT folks will be notified that that's happening. There's also log services around that as well. Then also just the URL filtering, that there's certain, again, this is related to your internet access, internet to the outside world, that there's just certain websites, web addresses that aren't even allowed to be accessed in your environment. This is just a model of the incident response plan. This was a recommendation for us. We are in the final stages of we've narrowed our search down for a firm to help us with this process. It's something that you could try going alone, but we decided that that's not our area of expertise. We need some help in this area, so we're looking for someone to partner with. But again, just the preparation piece, I believe that we've done a lot in that area as it relates to the assessment. And then going through the plan, when an incident occurs, identifying, exactly what's happened, what's been breached, what data has been hacked, and then finding a way to contain it, eradicating the threat, then going into recovery mode, and then learning from the process and making improvements for, if and when it happens again. And overlying all of this is a communications plan. And to me, that's probably the most critical part is, who do you call right when this happens? My advice is, if you don't have a plan right now, you call your city attorney. And then, at that point, it's privileged information, and you can decide, with your attorney, how you'll communicate with the public. But really, it's so important that you do have a plan of how you're communicating this attack to the public. As we saw in Atlanta, I believe that they struggled in that area. I really felt for them as they were going through this process, because again, I knew it could happen to any of us, but I did think on the communication side, they struggled. All right, moving into our bullseye here, going into the internal network now, getting a little more in-depth. This is where, and I'm not going to get into too technical, but something called access control list. Go back and ask your IT folks, do we use access control list? And that just essentially, the point of having that is if someone breaks into your network, they may be able to get into one system, one computer, but this will keep them from moving laterally throughout your network. Also, network segmentation, that you don't have, maybe departments or layers within departments, or all have segments, again, to keep the attacker from moving through your network. Also, something as simple as your network jacks. Look around your office and see where the data jacks are, and make sure that people can't come in from the outside and just plug in, and that they're then connected to your network. Not that would have happened in Decatur at all. But let's just say we learned a lot through the assessment process. Then moving in, looking at your servers and workstations, operating system. Ask if you're using the Windows firewall. Sometimes we heard our IT folks say, well, it really kind of wreaked havoc on this or that. And we got all these error messages, and we're like, no, we really need to make sure that that's in place and that's working. And then, of course, I'm sure most people, you have your antivirus, you have your malware software, making sure that that's current and it's up to date. And then taking a review of your applications, all the applications that are in use in your environment. Know what kind of data is being stored. Make sure that you're not storing credit card information, social security numbers. And then, and this is something that's real simple. Is your website completely standalone, separate from your network? I think a lot of people probably use a third party for the website. It's on a server, far away from where your city servers are, and that's a good policy, because that's another way that the hackers will try to get into your network. They can get into the website, and then if it's on the same platform as your network, they'll just go right in there. And then all the way down to the core is all of the data that's residing on databases and just within your network. So PII, personal identifiable information, just identifying what you have, and again, making sure that you don't have or if you do have the personal identifiable information, that there's there are restrictions on access to that. And that's where the next one is, that there is an approval process for access to certain data, that there are controls in place. Maybe the city manager has to approve someone having access to a certain network file. And then I encourage folks to use mobile device management. Now people have city cell phones, iPads, what have you, and there's mobile device management software, so that, say in the case that my iPad that's sitting in the back of the room, someone comes in, takes it, and then I'll turn to Josh, and he'll make sure that it's shut down and no one can have access to that. But there's a lot that can be controlled remotely. You can control access to these mobile devices. And then, speaking of data, not only is it good enough to know what you have and making sure that that data is protected, we do have an obligation to be transparent to our community, to the public, so the public knows what we're doing with their data. And so that's the purpose of having a policy. I think it's very important. Just like was it a year or so ago, I'm sure everyone was getting, hundreds of emails a week from private companies with their new privacy policies. Well, we need to do the same thing. We have an obligation to let our citizens know. This is we don't sell your data. We don't share your data with anyone else. We want to make sure that we are protecting people's privacy rights. And also, there's a lot of data that vendors have access to, and so we need to, as part of your privacy policy, also say we're going to get those policies, receive those policies from our third-party vendors, and we'll make those available on our websites. And so you may work with a tax software vendor. They have access to everyone's tax records. What are they going to do with that data? We need to make sure the public knows the answer to that. There's certain categories that we do address in our privacy policy. I believe that Russ he's going to be on the panel this afternoon. He may speak a little bit more to this. But make sure that you address, again, what do you do with the personal identifiable information? I'm assuming you can say you don't sell it, you don't share it. Mobile application tracking. So when people access your network from their cell phones, there's a way for us, for you to track, to track people from their cell phones and give them an option of, can they opt out of that tracking? And again, speak to that in your policy. Also, are we storing people's IP addresses when they hop onto our website? And then, going even further into the policy or the privacy area. Community events. You're taking people's photos. These are digital files that we're storing. We're storing them on our network. What happens to these photos? We tell people that this is public, and we actually don't ask permission to use them in publications. Again, if they're taken in a public setting, even if they involve children playing at the beach party, those are subject to be printed be on the city website or on the city newsletter. Again, that's the transparency piece. Think about these sensors that are collecting lots and lots of data. We've talked about our obligation to, how much do we communicate to the public about the data that's being collected? And we say if these are city-owned sensors, we are going to be as transparent as possible to say, there is a sensor, on this pole, and in some cases, can people consent to not have their data collected by that sensor? Quite often, if it's a city-owned and operated sensor, there may be that opportunity. If it's a third party that's put those sensors up, maybe the best you can do is just say, there's a sensor at this location. Your data may be subject to collection, but they're not going to have an option, the opportunity to opt in or opt out. And then finally, there are rules about children's privacy, and specifically with our website, we state and make the assumption that our website is not meant for children under the age of 13, and so. I think there's a Children's Privacy Act that specifies it's at 13 or older, children can make the decision to be on your website. But other than that, our website is not geared towards children, and we make a statement of that. So there's a lot more we can get into with the privacy. We'll be glad to share our privacy policy with you. Again, I know Russ will talk a little bit more about it this afternoon. So that's it.
Questions?
Thank you.